And good evening, everybody. Here we are with East Fishkill Library, and I'm Joyce Tomaselli from Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County. And our speaker today is Master Gardener Chris Ferrero, who is talking about gardening in small spaces. And with that, Chris, you're on your way.
Thank you so much. East Fishkill Library knows by now, the East Fishkill Library audience, which I think this is my 7th talk for East Fishkill, and I think you probably know by now that, that you should be getting Duchess Dirt, our Master Gardener newsletter, and all you have to do, in fact, on the handout, should be at the bottom of the plant list are some resources and dates and things, including how to access Duchess Dirt and get on the email newsletter. But it's what's not on there, and the hotline is on there too. If you've got other questions, and I may, in the course of this presentation, if you've got some questions about deer or things that could really send us down some little rabbit hole, I may divert you to getting to Joyce by going to cceduchess.org. Clicking on gardening, which is what it says to do on that handout, and then you can get right to her. Or you can call now. April to October is the gardener Master Gardener hotline, which is Wednesday mornings from
677-5067, Wednesday mornings, 9 and 8.
It's actually on this handout. I should be putting it on all my handouts, but that's helpful too. So you have lots of places to access more information, but I hope to give you a little bit to think about tonight. I'm going to start with sharing the screen and getting my slideshow from the beginning slide. So you should be looking at, see, you don't even know what you're looking at yet, do you? Because you think you're looking at a potted plant on a deck against a deck railing. That's my deck railing at my lake house, which is where almost all of the pictures that I use in here are from my lake house, actually, which is a collection of small spaces, including my deck, which is where this pot is. But what you might not see, I'm going to use my cursor to circle the what? The smallest of the small, the hummingbird. That is actually, this is a 5-inch hummingbird feeder that's on a little stake that goes in the middle of this plant. And that's what I use to illustrate the start of gardening in small spaces. But thinking about small spaces isn't just about small spaces. It helps sharpen your gardening skills overall, whether you're dealing with a small yard. And this is where I have to tell you that my Master Gardener colleague, Donna Crozier, originally conceived this presentation in its original form because she lives in a mobile home park, and that's her house right there. She is now retired from speaking, but she is a great inspiration, always has been a great inspiration to me. You could have a small townhouse backyard. You could have a little tight city lot. You could have a porch or a balcony, and that could be high or low. It could be urban or rural. But if you're talking about a porch or balcony, typically they're covered by a roof, which is one kind of challenge. Or you could have a deck, which is open to the sky and therefore to lots of rain, hopefully. But the good thing about decks is that they drain through those slats, don't they? And I have a picture at my lake house of our deck. And there's a little story behind this. I love gardening with purple. In fact, that's one presentation that I don't think East Fishkill has had yet. It's that presentation is called The Power of Purple. It was my final exam presentation for my Master Gardener training almost 10 years ago. And I love purple for contrast, and I love it so much that I painted my Adirondack chairs purple. My sister says I'm the only person she knows who would paint her Adirondack chairs to match her plants. Somebody, after giving this presentation, I've given this presentation for 8 years. Somebody just a few months ago asked me for the paint color of those chairs. And even though we no longer have those chairs, I mean, that's an old photo. Those chairs are dead and gone. But I found the paint in the basement at the lake. and I was able to give her the color, which was something like rich Merlot or something. But anyway, you can email me with questions after the presentation. If I can answer that one, I can answer anything. But you could have a patio. Patios are often extensions of houses and decks. And this is Donna's wave garden that does just that. The wave garden, I call it her wave garden because look at this line. My cursor's following the brick edging. It goes like this, and then it goes like this, and then it goes like this. That's the edge. This is a wonderful connector for a little, just a square brick patio, small square brick patio, but this bridges the patio and the common yard with her neighbors. I think that's lovely. It can also be an oasis in the middle of the yard, or a patio could be, a patio garden could be beside the swimming pool. And this was contributed to me by a student of my Pollinator Paradise class up here in the Berkshires. He had this wonderful little pollinator buffet by his pool. So poolside is another chance to have a little small space garden. It could be a walkway, like my old walkway when I lived in East Fishkill. This is a bluestone patio that a lot of people have leading up to the front doors. It could, or you could have by the sidewalk, you could create another little pollinator buffet. It could be a small scale disguise. That's one of the words I use for mailbox gardens, because mailbox gardens, sometimes you're trying to disguise a pretty, I mean, mailboxes are not pretty by nature. So we're trying to dress up an otherwise unappealing structure, but we also, a lot of us gardeners consider it our civic duty as a gardener to entertain passersby and walkers in the neighborhood. It's our duty, don't you think? But small gardens can also be used to disguise all kinds of eyesores, like bad driveways, and so many of us have bad driveways. Or, oh yeah, propane tanks. Oh, they've got to be covered up. And how much lovelier can you get than this kind of cover up? You can even divide a very large space into small rooms, and therefore you have small space gardens that look great from a distance, but also like this is the Mohonk Mountain House. They have carved large swaths of green lawn into beds with close-up, interesting close-up things happening, but they look wonderful from afar too, because they treat every one of those gardens as a small space garden. So it starts with thinking small, and there are 5 principles we're using that aren't just small garden principles, but let's say that for small spaces particularly, number 1, you have to think realistic. Number 2, think about downsizing plants. Number 3, think about vertical opportunities. Number 4, think about containers. And number 5, think about focal point. So we're going to start with realistic. And this is Donna's lovely little fence side garden that she planned for and developed, as you can see, in 3 different stages. But we all have, there is no such thing as unlimited real estate. We all have limits on our real estate that we're using for gardening. So it takes, you have to have a plan, you have to have discipline, and particularly when faced with neighbors bearing divisions of invasive plants, you got to have a little tough love too. Donna used to say, think outside the tool bag, because you really should be adding to your garden tools some other things. Your tape measure, your pencil, notebook. In fact, a notebook of graph paper is really helpful because there's no substitute for sketching your ideas when you're actually out in the yard. That's where you get your ideas, is when you're out in the yard. By the time you get indoors, things tend to leave your brain. So thus you have these in your bag, and nothing keeps you more honest than photos. Your naked eye just is not objective enough, and your naked eye might remember that garden more like how you planted it 10 years ago, before the canopy in your trees spread to make what was a sun garden into a shade garden. You're still seeing the sun garden from 10 years ago. The camera will tell you, oh my gosh, that's shade. No wonder those plants aren't doing as okay. It keeps you honest. She listed camera, by the way, but you know now it's easier because we have cell phones. And so make sure your cell phone's with you in your pocket, I say. But, you know, if you're a guy, it's always in your pocket. But women, they just don't make enough pockets for our cell phones. So I say fanny pack, or I put mine in, I have a cell phone armband that I wear for gardening. It keeps it clean and it's still accessible for me. So when you're talking about making a plan, we're first talking about a bird's eye plan that's called a property master plan. This is Donna's here. It can be very simple, but notice what she's added to it. I'm sorry. Notice what she's added to it up here is what we call a compass rose, which is to show your directional your directions, and sometimes just an N with an arrow is what landscape architects use, because you need to know where your light is coming from. Very important when you're doing your map. It can be simple as all get out, but the directional lighting is important. And then, you know, you need to keep a journal or some list of notes, some way to write down, whether it be just putting a spiral notebook and pencil into your garden bag, but you've already got that because you've put it in there for the graph paper too, so that you can write ideas. But in this case, we call it a journal because we want you to make notes about what works and what doesn't as the season goes on. Again, you forget. It's spring things that you say, you know what, I want to put some more bulbs here. But by the time summer's there, the bulb foliage is gone and you don't remember any of that until fall, when you go to order, when the bulbs comes back to your brain and you don't remember where you intended to put bulbs. Write it down. And outdoors. And also from your overall property plan, and your notes in your journal, you can make lists. By the way, that property master plan, you can also from that start to make individual garden plans that are closer up, where you can note what plants are actually in your gardens. But the lists are important because, number one, you don't go to a grocery store without a list, or else what happens? I mean, you end up buying things that you don't need and that they aren't very good for you sometimes. Well, that's sometimes what happens with the plants when you go to a nursery or a garden center. You end up with plants that you come home and you say, and you have in your arm and you're walking around the yard with this perennial in your hand saying, no, where am I going to put this? That's the opposite of good planning. By the way, do we all do it? Yes, we do. Because we're inspired when we go to the garden center. Better thing to do, by the way, when you go to the garden center and you see a plant that intrigues you, better to have your cell phone with you and take a picture of it so that you can come home and do that walk around your property and decide whether you should go back and get it or not, as opposed to having it in your arms and then having it sitting in your driveway and then in September saying, oh my gosh, I've got to plant this thing. Yes, we all do it. Another list that helps is obstacles and challenges, and that's typically in the categories of, of sunlight, like, oh my gosh, now I've got dry shade there where I used to have sun. I got to do something about that. Soil issues, like, gee, I got to add some compost and amend that soil. That clay is making it so there's standing water there, particularly when you have a neighbor that all of a sudden puts a driveway in or a patio in, and all of a sudden you've got water sheeting down into your gardens. Don't get me started. I don't live there anymore, but where my neighbor did that and I had standing water. But those things should be on a list that I would call obstacles and challenges, so that you can start checking off those things before you start planting things in the wrong place. And it also helps you with off-season reminders for, like I say, bulbs, or say pruning. No better time to be looking at what needs to be pruned than right now. Before your shrubs leaf out, you should be out there looking at what needs to be pruned and then looking up when they need to be pruned. Some of them should be pruned right now, but even if they bloom on old wood, which, you know, like your lilacs and weigelas, those are things that should be pruned after flowering. But by that time, the shrubs are all leafed out and you don't remember what they look like. Again, it's really good to take a picture of that shrub before it has leaves on it, so you remember what needs to be pruned. Okay, now we go to think downsizing. There are varieties that are naturally smaller, the dwarves, and on your handout, I've got several that I'm gonna talk to you about in this presentation. But there's also the ability to prune if you have the kinds of plants that you really love. And I think you saw in my mailbox garden an example, the tall Monarda bee balm, the big red bee balm, which you know, got very tall. And by the mailbox there, they were fine. I originally had some by my patio. not good in the patio because they were too tall. And what I had to do was actually pinch them back early in the season, like you do chrysanthemums. But we're going to get to that in a minute. First, we're going to deal with dwarves. And I'm going to give you a caution. Some dwarves, I mean, they don't all work as advertised. Some dwarves just will not cooperate with their downsizers. When hybridizers go to work, something has to give. That's what I always say. It can be an important thing like hardiness. Think echinacea, you know, your coneflowers, that the natural coneflower color is purple, but they start to downsize coneflowers and make them orange. Something had to take a hit. And you know what it was? Hardiness. You cannot have an orange, for the most part. Orange echinaceans are annuals. It's true for a lot of species that really shouldn't have been attempted to be downsized. For example, Joe Pyeweed. You see this guy standing there? That was my expression after 3 tries with Joe Pyeweed by my patio. And that's how tall it is. You might think it's a smaller crop. And that's why I like that picture, because he's about 6 feet tall. And again, the expression, get that expression, because when they say little Joe, they mean this is supposed to be a 4-foot version. And then after 3 years by my patio, where I had ripped out all the original Joe Pyeweed, which was too tall and too vigorous, I put in little Joe, which was supposed to be easier and not as spready and not as tall. And within 5 years, it was just as tall and just as spready, and I tore it out. And somebody said, "Oh, you should get baby Joe." And I will not repeat what I said to them.
I have to add, Chris, when the master gardener we know named Michelle, I won't do last name.
Yes.
I heard her ranting one day when she said, "This isn't little Joe, it's taller than I am."
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Yes, and that does sound like
but
Michelle.
It was supposed to be shorter.
I mean, the moral of the story is some plants just aren't meant to be diminutive patio plants. They belong at the wood's edge, or maybe in island beds. You know, you create these little islands in the middle of your lawn where you need something tall in the middle, and Joe Pye would be great because from a distance, they're lovely late flower bloomers, late season bloomers that stand erect, have beautiful stems. And beautiful flowers, are great cut flowers. Lots to be said for Joe Pyeweed. I now have Joe Pyeweed in the right place, but and I'm enjoying it. But your patio is not the right place. If anybody that's unmuted can tell me if you've got a similar experience, maybe Perovskia, for example, which is Russian sage, came out with little spires Perovskia. It still needs to be staked. I say if it needs to be staked, it's out of here. So therein lies the tough love. Does anybody else have a story for us?
No.
Before I move on, because I've got a couple more. One of them is on dwarf conifers, quote unquote. A nurseryman once told me there is no such thing as a dwarf conifer. That's his quote. Dwarf conifers do not stay small. They just grow tall more slowly. And so I have back in East Fishkill, I had a blue spruce Montgomery, which is as common as can be for a patio plant. It was supposed to stay 3 feet tall. I lived there for 20 years. It was cresting 5 feet when I left. And the answer might be that you sell your house and move, or you have to replace them. So I'm going to tell you some dwarves and downsized varieties that work. Every year, it seems, more dwarf varieties of our favorites crop up, and some of them really work. So on the left, you see bearded iris, the tall bearded iris. They can take up a lot of space, and the foliage that doesn't look so hot from July on might bother you if it takes up a lot of space in your garden and leaves a big hole if you cut it back. But this little native, which is called Iris cristata, the dwarf crested iris. What does it give up? Well, it gives up drama. What you've got is really a precious little, what was the adjective somebody gave me? Adorable. It's adorable, they said, because it's so tiny. It also loves shade, as opposed to, your bearded iris that needs sun. So I say if the canopy in your lot has taken over an area that is now shady and your big irises are not are not performing, are not flowering so much, try dwarf breast iris as a little ground cover in front of the border. And then the second plant you see here is Deutzia gracilis, which took over my front walk with masses of fragrant white blooms, of beautiful fragrance, but kind of a messy, big, messy plant that was hard to prune into shape. And so I replaced it with what they call slender Deutzia gracilis Nico. Nico is one variety, the dwarf mounding Deutzia, which is very well behaved. All it needs is a quick shaping now and then. And there's also pink ones. The hybrid called Yuki Cherry Blossom is on your handout, as in another little white one called Chardonnay Pearls, which is really nice. Early June, they're flowering like crazy, little froths of white flowers, beautiful. But again, they gave up the scent when they diminish the size. The scent left, but it's still very adorable. And then you see the big bleeding heart spectabile. It used to be called dicentra, now it's Lamprocampnos. We now know that it is not a dicentra because of DNA testing, but it's got a little cousin. A little cousin has the bleeding hearts. What it gives up is that those little bleeding hearts are not as dramatic. They aren't so detailed. But what you find over this fringed bleeding heart, Dicentra eximia, what you find is that the mound of foliage at the bottom is very tidy. And it goes on and on and on. Unlike the big bleeding hearts, which kind of fry by July, they're looking bad, and they're any kind of sun will fry it. And then you got a big hole in your garden when it goes away. The little bleeding hearts go on and on and on and have a chance of blooming. That's the fringed bleeding heart. It's on your handout. And then you've got your big buddleias, your big butterfly bushes. Well, in the Master Gardener plant sale, go to CCEDC.org to see that this year. It's always the weekend after Mother's Day. It is Friday and Saturday after Mother's Day, and this year it's online, and you can see lists of plants online and then order online, and just have things put into your car by Master Gardener volunteers on that Friday and Saturday. Go and check that out. But last year I bought in that sale this little butterfly bush, this Buddleia lavender cupcake. What isn't to love about that name? And you know, I love natives, and this is not a native, but oh my gosh, it grew to 4 feet high in its first year, perfectly round, unlike a lot of big rangy Buddleias that are hard to shape, hard to keep in shape. 4 feet high, and it came back. Every stem came back this fall, this spring. And it blooms earlier. And I think that might be the reason the hybridizers work to make this one bloom earlier in the season. So it didn't sap all of its energy just before the cold hit. I'm really keeping my hopes up for this 4-footer. The 4-footers tend to be okay, but the 2-foot, when they go to something called blue chip, and this is how they advertise it in this little inset, blue chip is 2 feet. They advertise as a container plant. None of this works for our zone, none. It's I actually took when I did this talk for the Master Gardeners, I took a poll, and raise your hands type poll with 40 Master Gardeners, and said, how many of you tried lavender blue chip? And I don't know, maybe something between 8 and 10 hands went up, and I said, how many of you still have blue chip? Not one hand went up. So 2 feet seems to be the point at which our zone hardiness, it's not hard enough for our zone. The 4-foot, I'm looking forward to it. Hey Joyce, do we have lavender cupcake this year? No, right? We have another Buddleia in the sale?
I will look it up. I don't memorize it. I'll get back.
Oh yeah, okay. I can't either, and I'm the one who gave you lots of shrub ideas.
There's 245 different plants for sale. I'll go look up Buddleia.
Yeah, okay, you do that. Keep you busy, keep you out of trouble for a bit. All right, so even if you're talking about shade, there are lots of dwarf perennials. There are lots of dwarf hostas, by the way, and my experience is most of them work really well. Hostas are very sturdy when it comes to hybridizing. Apparently, because every little miniature I have one called mouse ears. Oh my gosh, it's so cute. The ears are perfect. They're kind of round. Um, but there are so many little tiny hostas. And on the right, you see my one of my gardens at the lake, and there's two stories to this. One is that there are different size astilbes. So this is the Astilbe chinensis, which comes in midsummer, early summer, I'd say June, and red, pink, white, raspberry. One is called Raspberry Sensation or Sizzle or something. They're very upright. They're very nice. They're not as tall as the Astilbe orenzii, but they're nice fillers with nice height. And then here you see this little clump in the front. That's an Astilbe pumila. Astilbe pumila blooms later, is like a little tiny version, even the leaves of Astilbe chinensis, little tiny, and it's always, pumila is almost always raspberry colored blooms. And they bloom later. So you see there's a sequence here. These bloom, they start to go by, and these are coming up. You can see one coming up here, and they happen in late July, early August. But the second story about this photo is that when I went to use this photo in this presentation, this is what photos do for you. I went, oh my gosh, what happened to that hosta? These hostas need to be divided. I wasn't even, never even hit me until I saw the photo, how big these hostas had gotten. In fact, they were encroaching all the other, look at the astilbes getting sucked under these hostas. These hostas aren't here anymore, and it's because of this picture. The camera does work. Keep you honest. Now we're going to talk about two sets of downsized shrubs. So first I've got these natives, and we love natives because they're great for pollinators, and they often fit into our landscapes more naturally because they require less inputs. That means less water, less fertilizer, less pesticide use, because they're adapted to our environment. We love natives, but they are often, whoops, natives can be big woodland plants naturally. The species, they can be big and kind of ungainly. That can challenge smaller home landscapes. So I'm going to give you 4 of these big guys, and they're 4 dwarves that work for me, that work for many of us. This is Father Gilla. You may not have heard of Father Gilla. This is Father Gilla Mount Airy, actually, which is a big beauty. It's got, Father Gillas tend to have bluish foliage, but they've got early fragrant bottle brush. A lot of natives have these bottle brush blooms, very fragrant bottle brush blooms that are very early. They're coming in right now here, but they also have great fall color. But now that's too big. I mean, it's a 6 to 8 footer. Sometimes they get to be 10 feet if they're the species. But this is what's called the dwarf Father Gilla. Father Gilla gardeniae. Father Gilla gardeniae is probably 3 feet tall, has the same bottle brush blooms, fragrant, that come in before they leaf in. A lot of them have that blue foliage and have names with the name blue in it for their varietal names. And fall color. The fall color of Father Gilla is spectacular. I like to have one near the door because of the fragrance and the fall color. It's a beautiful little shrub. And then we have next the clethra. Clethra has these erect bottle brush blooms. The wonderful thing about clethra, even though it can be big, it can colonize, it can spread beyond bounds in its big natural form. But it's a flowering champ, and it's just when you need it. Late July, late summer, when everything else is looking a little ragged, you've got clethra coming in with these beautiful pollinator blooms that are so fragrant and so fresh looking that you feel like you've rejuvenated your garden. It also doesn't mind dry, doesn't mind shade, but does best in sun with moist feet. In fact, this is what I use for standing water in my yard. It can be fine in standing water. It's a great rain garden plant. But it can be big. So we have, the dwarves in clethra can be very nicely shaped too. This one's called hummingbird. Hummingbird is a 3 to 4 feet. And again, sun or shade has the same properties, including fall color, by the way, as its parent plant. Now we come to another little plant called the Itea. Itea is also called sweet spire, but there's so many shrubs with the name sweet in them and spire in them that Itea is actually better. Here is sweet spire Itea Scentlandia, and that's the fall color. Again, the fall color is spectacular. And I got to tell you that the Itea, no matter what size you get, they're not big plants. The Itea in its natural size is probably a 4-footer, but Henry's Garnet is a 4-footer, but Little Henry is a 3-footer to and Sweets and Scentlandia, which I have, is a 2-footer. They are really cool. One of the things about these little bottle brush blooms is they're not just great for it. They're not just fragrant and great for pollinators, but they add a little bit of craziness, whimsy to your foundation plantings, let's say, or your mailbox planting. They also tolerate salt. Well, the Itea does, so it's really good for mailbox planting. But it's kind of, they're not held, you can see they're kind of chaotic the way they hold their blooms. Their branches are also a little chaotic. It's a little whimsical and a little more fun in terms of its habit. It's not so tidy. It's not going to be a jelly bean for you. Like you can make this clethra jelly bean into a jelly bean, but better not to. And then finally, you're probably familiar with winterberry. You probably already know that winterberry doesn't have much charm to it as a big shrub until the red berries come in late in the season. But you might not know that winterberries make up for the lack of ornamental value until the berries by the fact that those berries are the best bird berry of all the species we've got in the Northeast. Those berries are the highest fat content berries you can find in the berry producing natives. And among many that the birds love, this is the one that gets them all the way through winter. And if you've got berries in March, which I still do on some of my winter berries, that's a good sign because they're still going to be able to, they've been keeping going with those and they'll keep going. They can be very profuse, these berries, which would be great. But they tend to be big. So you might not want to give space to such a big thing that's only going to come in the fall. There are lots of little ones now. This one's called Red Sprite. And I have a couple that are orange called Orange Goblin. They're 3-footers and they tend to have a tidier habit. They're all in your handout. So even the big hardy hydrangea type shrubs can be downsized, believe it or not, because on the left you see hydrangea paniculata. On the left, these two are hydrangea paniculatas. They can be 8-10 footers. The old PG hydrangeas, you see in cemeteries, 8-10 foot. They train them into trees sometimes. They are big. However, but they turn pink in there's so much to be said for hydrangea paniculata, even though it isn't a native. This is okay. This is Bobo. No, yes, this is Bobo. This is little Bobo. I'm going to show you. There it is. Hydrangea paniculata Bobo is a 4-foot version of a panicle hydrangea. And I use it. I have several in my house now because they fit under your windows perfectly. They're great foundation plants. Because 4 feet is about it. And not only that, but they tend to be 4 feet high, 5 feet wide. They're wider than they are tall. And that's a great habit for your foundation plantings. But they turn pink just the same way this is turning pink. They turn pink, and the white ones keep coming in, and the pink ones get darker pink, and so you've got 3 or 4 shades of pink by August and September, and in September they all turn dark pink. It's a great thing, panicle hydrangeas. This one is called Quickfire. It's a fairly recent introduction, meaning in the last 10 years, and it was introduced to be an earlier bloomer because they don't start blooming, panicle hydrangeas, typically until mid-July. Well, this starts blooming in early July. I don't think it's that much earlier, but it has some other things going for it. It's got dark red stems. It's got really bright, thus the fire in the name. It's got really bright red panicles by fall. By September, actually, the panicles are quite red because it started blooming earlier. But it's still a 6 to 7 foot shrub. So what have we got? Little Quickfire. And little quick fire, this is my little quick fire in my shade garden at the lake, dry shade. And typically panicle hydrangeas want lots of sun and moist feet, so you have to mulch them. But you know, they're easy. This little quick fire is in my shade garden, gets at most 4 hours of sun a day. And therefore it's got pink blooms instead of dark red blooms, but it's a sweet little plant and very tidy at 3 feet. Here we've got one of two natives. These two are our native hydrangeas in the Northeast. This one's called a smooth hydrangea, or arborescens. And the arborescens, the most popular over the decades, Annabelle has been the most popular variety you'll find in nurseries, and they have these big white mop heads. But it's a big shrub. You can get smaller ones. In fact, you can get them in pink now. This is one I've got called Mini Mauvette, which is, again, the smooth hydrangea, arborescens. And there are many little ones. You got to read the tag, though. You got to make sure that any of these, that you're not getting the 6-footer, you're getting the 3-footer or the 4-footer at maximum height. This is the other native. It is actually native to the Southeast, but it's really does really well up here. By the way, these two adapt very easily to our landscapes because of their native status. This one is called oak leaf hydrangea, hydrangea quercifolia. See how it holds the panicles up? These are huge, by the way. They can be a foot tall, and because the leaves are huge. And the shrub is huge. This can be an 8 to 10 foot shrub, but the fall color is spectacular. There are few shrubs that give you the fall color that this shrub does. In fact, my little 4-footer, this is it. 2 years ago, when it was in its first season, I planted it in June, and by late October, it was turning dark purple. This is the fall foliage you get, you know, in late season. It turns all these fall colors, orange and bronze and gold and red, and then late season, dark purple. And this was it in its first year, and now it's 4 feet high and wide. Ruby Slippers is a wonderful little dwarf, intense color. So before I leave the downsizing, if you want to talk about right sizing your tall varieties, I mean, you might not want to or can't remove your tall things, but you can early in the season prune either by pinching or with your bypass pruners. Go in and prune by 1/3 to 1/2, depending on the species, for later, more prolific. I say more prolific bloom is because what's happening is when you're cutting back your, let's say your chrysanthemum by 1/3 in Memorial Day and another 25% by 4th of July, or maybe just once you prune it by 1/3, as long as it's by 4th of July with mums. And what happens is where you cut branches, and at the end of, instead of just one stem with one flower, you've got, you know, 3 branches with more flowers. They tend to be smaller flowers. They tend to come in 2 weeks later, but you can do that with one plant and stake the other, and then you've got a succession of bloom. But all of these, these are just some examples of what she talks about in this book, which is a book that is another poll of Master Gardeners. This is one of our favorite books ever. The Well-Tended Perennial Garden. It is on your handout. And she has this has been has a new edition, actually. You can go in and get an old edition for $1.99 plus shipping, you know. And it's fine because in the newer editions she did amend the glossary in which she goes plant by plant, talking about plants and tough love and all that. A lot has changed. Not a lot has changed over the whole book. It's mostly in the appendix, the glossary. So you can get a very cheap version of that if you want, and it will be very helpful to you when you're talking about right sizing your plants. So now we go on to think vertical, and this is just a way to make best use of space. If you've got vertical space and not horizontal space, go up. It can also help balance your designs visually. And it can also help with distance appeal, which means that not just on your deck, but from your backyard, when you're looking at your deck, you're seeing color. So vertical structures help, like this wrought iron piece that Donna uses. There's also, you can make your own DIY structure. This is with rocks. You can also use, I've seen tree stumps cut off as little plant stands. And you see the taller plant stands behind and taller behind that. And you've got your own little arrangement, which can change year to year. This is a photo of our, our farm and home center in Millbrook has demonstration gardens. We're talking just 2 miles east of the Taconic off the Route 44 exit, and you're in East Fishkill. It's about 15 minutes, and I would encourage you to go see the demonstration gardens sometime. There are many of them around the farm and home center, which is just a brick box. How did we dress this brick box one year? We made trellises out of branches and saplings. Very easy to do with screws, branches, and saplings. We made our own trellises and stood them up with rebar to hold them up straight. And then we planted clematis. And you're not seeing the clematis because the clematis has already gone by at this stage. You can see by the seed of the sedum here that this is later in the summer. And later in the summer, once the clematis has gone by, because that blooms in late May, early June, we also planted seeds of what's called lab or hyacinth bean vine. And those seeds came up and populated the same trellises that the clematis were on, but covered up the gone by foliage with brand new flowers. So that's another way to work vertical. I want a traditional use. If you've got vertical wall space, and I mean, if you've really got blank walls, it's, as a gardener, you should look at it as a place to garden. And you can get creative. So we've got I found this new for you traditionalists who really want to use window boxes on windows, and you might not have them in the right places, so you make your own. Okay, that's one idea. But now I'm going to show you a couple other creative ideas. Talk about window box. This is a palette that's been cut and painted, okay, to disguise this otherwise pretty homely wall. And then we've got what Sabelicos used to do on their shed. These are old tires that they used to paint, and this is a wheelbarrow planted underneath them. These are old tires. I will tell you, they had them for maybe 3 years before they either ran out of tires or grew tired of planting, but they always sold out. So I call this display Fighting the Tyranny of Good Taste. I found that expression somewhere. I love that, because actually what I'm missing is in live audiences, by the time I get this second picture put up, I actually hear gasps from the audience. There are people who think that's interesting, but there are lots of people who are horrified by what may look like bad taste to people. So I up the ante and show them the planted tires. If I were to get even worse, I would show you one year they planted Ray Sabelicos' old farming boots. Because I will tell you that Diane Sabelico, who's married to Ray Sabelico, is one of 2 container planting managers at Sabelicos. The other one is Denise Grogan, who is now a master gardener, and she actually does a presentation called Container Enthusiasm about container planting. You might want to sign up for that. If you want to, Amanda and Gloria from East Fishkill Library are on right now, and if you want to tell them, you can always stop by the desk and tell them what interests you for future programs.
I have to give you one more, Chris. On Hooker Avenue in the 8th Ward in Poughkeepsie, there's a beautiful old home that had a big wraparound porch, and they're gone now. But for several years, they were all filled with porcelain toilets that were planted.
There's another one.
I remember that one.
About the tyranny. Yeah, fighting the tyranny of good taste. Yes. But I was also going to say, for a blank wall, you could, if you have an ugly downspout, you can take the Tuscan approach. And then again, you can make it yourself, but there are lots of ladders, and they sell them commercially, very high priced in some cases, ladders that can hold plants vertically. And if it's not your wall that's bothering you, but your neighbor's wall that's bothering you, try hanging some planters from your tree to disguise that far off wall. There's yet another way to use vertical space. But I want to draw your attention to these 3 pictures. There is in each of these pictures, we're going to come back to this with containers next, but there is in each of these pictures a unifying element that makes them pleasing visually. Every one of them has a unifying element. In the middle one is blue flowers and terracotta pots. It's the terracotta pots of unusual sizes, shapes, and textures, but it's all terracotta on the left. And it's, again, the blue flowers on the right, along with the coir planters. So now we go on to containers. And the main use for containers is that you've got portable color. They don't have to be stationary. On the left, you see at my lake house, you'll see this. This is one of those dragon wing begonias that start out like this. And actually, this is maybe late June. By August, it is 3 times this size. And, you know, I can move these around. This actually replaced an orange echinacea that didn't come back. This is years ago. And I didn't come back, and I didn't have time to plant a perennial in time for it to take that hole. So I moved a container in there. Likewise, I use the containers like this, like when this rhododendron goes by and all I see is green. If you put your hand over that, you know, the landscape doesn't look interesting. It's all green, and you don't even see the texture because it's too green. But you put that in front and everything takes on life. By the way, this in the lower corner here, you see my, again, another dragon wing begonia. And also a tuberous begonia, but the dragonwing begonia is in this antique milk crate that has handles, which makes it that much more portable. I've got it here by the watering spout. I'm watering them, but they are going to be, you know, being put on the deck or wherever and moved around during the season. And here we have on the dock, you know, not only can you bring your gardens onto the deck or the dock or the patio, because that's where you spend your time. Wherever you spend your time, you can bring your containers, even if you don't have a garden bed there. Not only that, it's where the deer do not spend their time, because deer do not go upstairs. Even if you just got a couple stairs up to your deck, it's pretty safe from deer. So think of that when you want to plant a sweet potato vine, but you're worried about putting it out in the garden because the deer always eat them up. Well, put them on your deck where your woodchucks will come and eat them. Don't get me started. Okay. And by the way, vertical, you see how my husband built a shelf across there so I could put more planters up? But I want to tell you, planters and containers do need more maintenance. If you're a perennial gardener, you know the containers are that much more labor intensive. They trade the value of being portable with needing more watering, more fertilizing, more deadheading. You know that if you're using a slow release, like a potting mix, like the Miracle Grow potting mix, which is a synthetic and therefore very short life to that fertilizer, that if you have a rainy early summer, it's all leached, all those nutrients are leached out and it leaves nothing but dead dirt, no microorganisms in there at all. We recommend actually scratching in or mixing in with your planting soil, a plain light potting mix, not with slow release fertilizer because that's synthetic typically. But if you instead mix in a slow release organic granular, like the kind that Espoma makes, Espoma being the maker of Hollytone and those other smelly tones that are come in bags, and you open up the bag, you go, whoa, that's organic. Slow release granular will not hurt the plants. You can't use too much, but don't. And they last for weeks because it's a true slow release. That's what to do for your containers. You know, and as far as design, you know that the big containers they show in magazines, they talk to you about the thriller, filler, and spiller design that you should use. The thriller being the stand up in the middle, like this dark leaf dahlia that I've got here, and the filler being like the petunias are common fillers for, and then there's the drapey ones, which are the spillers, like the sweet potato vine here. That combo works in a giant pot if you're talking about sitting right near it. It's very satisfying on your deck outside your sliders. But if you've got some distance, the problem is that all those things kind of muddy up and turn brown from a distance, and you don't really see the individual textures and colors. Better to, like I have here, put them in separate pots and move them around so they can be, you know, so that you can see. That way you've got bigger splotches of color. But I also want to suggest that for groupings, you do one of two things. You either use similar plants and colors in diverse pots. So if you've got a diverse selection of pots, try to use all blue, like in that slide that I showed you before. Or if you've got a lot of different pots, different plants like I do, try to use, I got, the cobalt blue, kind of unify this grouping. I get them, thank God for Ocean State job lots, because that's where you can get these ceramic pots more cheaply, the big ones more cheaply, and you can get lots of different shapes and sizes in the same color. That's what unifies this grouping. Otherwise, you look at chaos. Your eye can't take in all the chaos at once if you're talking about a big grouping. For vegetables, really, lettuce bowls on your patio table, absolutely. You can plant them right now. This is Norma Chang's garden2walk.com. I think she retired it. She's now a retired master gardener. She actually experimented with window box Swiss chard, which came in beautifully. Any container can work for vegetables, but this is a reservoir container. There's a watering tube that you can't see. It's a black watering tube. You water through that tube, and about 2 gallons of water, I think, keeps in the lower 2 inches of this pot under a floor with lots of holes, and the plant's roots go down to that water. You only have to water once or twice a week because it's constantly, and boy, tomatoes, carrots, spinach, they love constant moisture. They don't like to dry out and then get wet and then dry out and get wet. It's not good for the crop. But reservoir containers help keep plants watered, and it's also a lot less effort on your part trying to keep things watered. As with herbs, but the small versions of herbs. This is spicy globe basil, which is a small version of your pesto, your big Genovese pesto basils. You can put in a container a small spicy globe basil, and even the leaves are small and take less chopping for your caprese salad. And by the way, another nice one is Thai basil, which has purple blooms, and you can let it go to bloom and it still is useful as a culinary leaf. Sometimes when basils bloom, it can be the death knell for the plant, but not with Thai basil. You get beautiful colors, beautiful flowers, and great culinary use plant for your deck. And oregano, which can be a spready beast because it's a garden thug because it's in the mint family. But what they call oregano compactum, you can put in a pot. Same thing with marjoram, which tends to be a better behaved, milder flavor than oregano, but same use. You can put it in a container and it does quite well. And rosemaries, can be nice big thrillers in a pot, but you can also get the prostrate rosemary, which isn't pictured here. This is one of my pots. I meant to replace this. The prostrate rosemary actually flops over, doesn't have tall woody stems. It flops over and is actually a spiller rather than a thriller. And the prostrate variety is very nice. There are just as many in Ray Sabelico's Herbs Tent, just as many prostrate varieties of rosemary as there are upright. Go check them out.
And Chris, I find when I grow my herbs in pots, I just put the pots in the barn and they come back just fine, the perennial ones.
Yeah, I thank you,
Things like
Joyce.
mint, all of the thugs, just
Yep.
throw them in the barn in the corner and bring them out and they're back.
I actually put mine under my deck. I grow my mint in a pot and put it under my deck, and in the spring I bring it out. It's fine. Rosemary is a lot pickier, but I will tell you that, and somebody in a nursery told me this, that the prostrate rosemaries tend to winter over better, and I've had that experience myself. Under lights in your house, you do have to keep them watered, but that's my whole herbs presentation, so we won't go there right now. But when we talk about focal point, we're asking the eye to kind of take charge of the scene as opposed to saying, oh no, too much chaos. If you give the eye a place to start, it can take in the scene much better, and everything looks much more organized if there's a focal point. And it helps with small gardens because your eye can give it as much value. Your small garden has as much value to the eye as a big garden if you give it a place to start. It can be a sculptural object. It can be a plant that's really striking. It can be an item used to support a planting. And here's an example of a structure, you know, just a bench or a seating area can give the eye a place to start in a small garden pocket. Or I will tell you that as a support a birdhouse is one of my favorite kinds of things to support. You know, that clematis vine that you saw, this is another clematis that's not on a trellis like I showed you at the Farm and Home Center. This is on a birdhouse and climbing up the birdhouse, which is really sweet. As are bird baths. Bird baths are really cool, not just because they give a structural place for the eye to start, but because there's often motion. When there's water in there, there's motion with the birds, and that attracts the eye. And then finally, I wanted to show you, this came on board a couple of years ago. I added this because if you Google DIY garden totem, you will see lots of examples of people with found objects, making them into these little totem poles that are great little vertical places in small gardens for the eye to start. And it can feature something that you put away that you don't know what to do with, but give it its spot in the small garden, and it is a win-win. So I'm going to, for the next few slides that finish up the presentation, I'm going to ask you to help me find the focal point in these slides. And I'm going to give you a little clue on the first one. It's the gazing ball. But I want to tell you that this is a good example of there being several different layers of use here. The gazing balls took me a long time to understand why my grandmother's gazing ball, which I think of as, you know, Italian kitsch. Okay, that's how I grew up, along with her little Madonna over here and her, you know, her gazing. I think of it as, you know, I unfortunately connect it with an aesthetic that didn't ever appeal to me. And yet the idea behind the Victorians who popularized gazing balls was what you see in this picture. It's not the green ball, it's what's reflected in the green ball, thus the gazing ball. And what you see reflected in there is a beautiful focal point. But it's also a good thing to put something like this, many examples you could use, that you can move around the garden, because sometimes you get something like this lonely hollyhock that otherwise just looks like a fragment that is a messy piece of a garden, and you've just given it star status. And maybe it's only for a couple weeks and you can move it to something else that needs help, but that's the beauty of a focal point. So what do you think? What's the, is anybody unmuted and can tell me, this is at our Farm and Home Center. This is one of the demonstration gardens and it's used like this year after year. What do you think the focal point is? Does anybody have a clue?
Is it a bird bath or?
It is a bird bath, thank you. That's the bird bath that cracked and normally you'd throw it out, unless you can plant it with succulents and make it a focal point. Here's one of my shade gardens at the lake house. And by the way, yes, this was an echinacea, a small echinacea called Pixie Bright or something. And I bought 6 of them and they were all through here. And after a couple of years, there was only one left. So what's the focal point that I used?
Sculpture.
Yeah, that's a copper, thank you. That's a copper watering thingy that twirls, and I don't know that they even sell them anymore. They were in Ocean State, but it's copper. It doesn't work anymore, but it's a great little, like you say, sculpture. Because I'm going to use my cursor here, because this big field of epimedium, and I love epimedium, but it for dry shade, you know, there are trees all around here, tree roots like crazy, but this epimedium took over where all the echinacea were, and now I've got this sea of green that looks boring, and I love epimedium, but there's too much, and do I want to divide it? Not this year. Good, I'll stick this in there. And that gives the eye a place to start. And all of a sudden it doesn't look like too much epimedium because there's a focal point. Likewise, vinca. Now this isn't my place, but I wanted to show you this because vinca has the same problem. I love beds of vinca. Not native, can be really spready, but you can mow around them. They're better for pollinators than lawn. But boy, after those beautiful blue flowers, that sea of blue that goes away as of June leaves nice glossy evergreen leaves, but not much else. Put your hand over this so that you can't see the urn, and you can see what happens is boring and just green. but you now have the urn, which by July has coleus that's blooming like, that's nice and big and bushy. And you've got a beautiful focal point to take over where the Winkle left off. Okay, find the focal point. This is at New York Botanical Gardens, I think. Yeah, New York Botanical Gardens. I took
The
this.
swan, the bird.
That's yes. I think it's an egret. But thank you. That is, you got that wrong. It's an egret. No,
Sorry.
I think.
but you're right.
Chris,
Some people actually don't see the egret. Their eye goes to the astilbe. It's a beautiful swath of astilbe. There's a path that goes up here around these hostas. Beautiful swath of astilbe. And astilbe foliage looks great in July and August. However, the flowers are gone and it just looks all green. That's when this guy is necessary. This guy and his partner take over as focal points. Again, when you look at, the sequence of bloom problem is a problem for all of us perennial gardeners. It is the holy grail of perennial gardening, I say, because it's almost something that you try your whole gardening career to solve. And it's hard to do that unless you've got unlimited resources. But your focal points, structural or otherwise, can help you with that.
Actually, Chris, those are great blue heron, and heron are territorial. And when you put fake great blue heron out, the real great blue heron does not come and eat your fish in your fish pond. And
I am
give that
so glad you
experience.
told me that.
So
I am
there.
so glad you corrected me. Great blue heron. You're right. What did I say egret for? It is a blue heron. Yes. Thank you. I love it. I love it. See, I learn something every time I give a talk. I learn something. How about this? This is your messy meadow. Your messy, those people who want to turn their backyards into a meadow, but say, oh no, it's too chaotic. But what brings order to this picture? What's the focal point here?
It's almost a walkway, isn't it?
Mhm.
Very good. Oh man, a small audience, but a good one. This is a curved path, is a place that the eye loves to rest. And all you've got to do to make that meadow less than chaos, let's say more than chaos, is you don't even need that little grapevine fence that you see around the right there. A curved line in particular, a good smooth path gives the eye a place to start. And all of a sudden, those flowers look lovely. It's not messy. It's now something that is orderly. But that curved, any curved edge can help in any of your beds because it gives your eye a tidy place to start. This is a particularly tidy, a freshly edged bed with just a little mulch in the front, not needed because of the dense mess back here of lots of different perennials. In fact, this Lizomachia, please don't plant that. It will be in your lawn before you know it. But back here, you might say this is the focal point, and I'm going to tell you, you don't even need it. Although this is a nice way to complement focal points. You don't even need it because the eye can start with a curved line, is satisfied with that, and the rest of this, that can be you may fail to deadhead it all season long, and it'll still look neat because you've got a nice edge. Just an idea for tired gardeners. One more, one more after this, but this was actually the place where I started with the power. With one of my presentations. I can't give it away. What is the focal point here?
Is it the maple?
Yeah.
Purple.
It's purple. Thank you.
Purple.
It's purple. It's a dark red splotch there. I actually had my husband do this because we were in Boston Common and he said, isn't that a beautiful scene early in spring? And I said, what? But at our house, unless something's flowering, you say, where's the flowers? What do you find beautiful here? He said, I don't know. It just looks all green and nice. And I went, oh, the reason why it looks green and nice is because there's a contrast point. Your eye starts here. And if you put your hand up and obliterate it, it all just looks like lots of green. But the minute you put the dark purple contrast, everything else comes into focus. And by the way, there's a little version of this. If you want a tiny version, this is at Berkshire Botanical Garden, where the horticulture director she retired this year, but this is a split leaf hellebore back here. And this is a carex in the front. And they just are kind of green after spring. But she always plants these annuals in stripes kind of through the gardens. This is called Little Ruby. I think we have Little Ruby that we're selling because I propagated it and Anjali propagated it, Joyce, and she's the one who contributed to the team. Now the master gardeners sell this Little Ruby alternanthera, and it is it's tiny here, dark purple foliage plant, annual, and yet it gets to be about 18 inches tall, and a little mound of, it becomes a nice 18-inch mound of purple. And so what you see in that garden is by July, you've got a nice mounding purple thing through them. It makes all the other greens look great. Okay, a last one. This is from my old garden in East Fishkill.
Is this a water feature of some kind?
That's what you're, thank you. That's what you're supposed to say. Yes, thank you. It is a water feature. It's a little kidney pond. All it is one of those shells you buy at Adams or, you know, whatever garden center. It's about an 18-inch deep, kidney shaped, maybe 4 feet long. And that we plugged in there, and we have a little water pump that recirculates, and these rocks in the back cover up the tube that comes up and puts it back in. So there is water coming back in and recirculating, and the toads love, I mean, the little frogs and toads love it. And I will tell you that it's not so much the visual, you really have to be on the patio to see it. But my home office window is 2 stories up directly over this pond, and I do not have to see it to have my whole backyard view out of that window come alive, because I'm hearing the sound of moving water. And what I want to suggest to you as a close is that even moving water to your ear as a focal point can be something that, if you add nothing but that to your home landscape, you can transform even the smallest of spaces. So that is the end of the presentation, and I would invite your other questions now, if you have them.
You mentioned
go ahead.
You mentioned there was a plant that could tolerate the salt that the town spreads by the mailboxes.
Yes.
What was that again? And
that one is ITEA. Several of them are actually. I think all of the ones on that slide. Let me go back here. You're gonna see it on your handout too. It's ITEA Sweet Spire that I specifically was talking about at that point, Ursula. But I want to. There you go. Let me go. You're going to get dizzy. Oops. Oops, no. Oh, dwarves. It was when we were talking about dwarves, yes.
And often if you search plants for salt tolerance, there will be lists that people have that can, some plants are more salt tolerant.
Yep. But natives are often salt tolerant, and I will tell you that Fothergilla is salt tolerant, Clethra is, but ITEA particularly is. I'm not sure about winterberry, but it's easy to Google. If you can either from one end or the other, you can take a plant and say, is Clethra salt tolerant in your Google search, or you can start with salt tolerant plants.
Okay.
And it's just a good thing to think about that. I have some people down the street actually who are saying to me, how come we can't get these little evergreens? They look brown every spring. And I say, well, and in fact, we have sidewalks here in Stockbridge, Mass, where I live now. We have sidewalks separating the street from people's foundation plantings, and because they're little tiny front yards in the village. But even the sidewalks, that isn't, salt trucks throw salt a long way. So I would say, 10 feet into your yard, you still need to worry about salt tolerant plants.
Okay, thank you.
The other resource is Cornell's Woody Plant Database. You can look up any woody plant, shrub, vine, tree, and it'll give you characteristics including salt tolerance.
Okay, thank you.
I need to add a column to my handouts. Those, my handouts come from a master database that is getting way too big. It's got columns that I don't, that for different presentations, I use different plants in different columns, but salt tolerance is one that I think is probably going to be useful. So thank you for asking that. Anybody else have a question? It's now 7:45. Time for dinner.
Thank you so much. I learned a
Grabs a
lot.
cocktail.
Thank you.
Thank you. It'll be great to
Thank
see
you.
you again in the coming months. Bye-bye,
Definitely,
everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
definitely.
Thank you,
Good
Chris. Thank
night.
you, Joyce.
Bye.